bring Keith Smith into the conversation. CelticsBlog.com, RealGM.com here on the Boardwalk on the Hotline. The question is, have the Sixers gained enough experience over the first 3 games to help them navigate their way to extend this series tonight? And do you, Keith, think that the Sixers' lack of experience has been the difference in this series?
I don't know if it's been a lack of experience, because Boston doesn't really have all that much more experience than the Sixers do. It's really Al Horford, and at this point, guys like Al Horford and J.J. Redick, pretty similar playoff experience in both of their pockets. I think it's just been execution. It's Philadelphia, unfortunately, has seen a lot of the things that were problems early in the year that are for a lot of young teams, which is closing halves and then closing games, have cropped back up. They've a lot of sloppy turnovers, a lot of defensive breakdowns, and this is the worst time for those things to come up, because when you have a team that executes as high as Boston does, they'll take any advantage they can get and work it until it doesn't work.
One of the things that has been brought up a lot from the people in this area and even nationally is that Brett Brown has had a tough series and has really played a hand in them losing the 3 games. Would you say that Brett Brown is really being exposed in this series?
Yeah, I don't know how much of that is true, because I don't think he's doing anything different than what people were praising him for doing down the stretch in the regular season when they won the 16 games in a row, and then what was it, 20 out of 21 or whatever it was there. I don't think he's doing anything different. I think the reality is this is not a great matchup for Philadelphia. Even with Boston being banged up, they just don't have the extra perimeter defensive player that they can put on a guy like Tatum or Brown or Rozier. They only have really 2 guys who can do that instead of 3, and that's partially lineup and roster construction with Ben Simmons at the point. You don't have another defensive-minded guard out there, and that's really been a huge difference maker in this series.
Yeah, Keith, when you look at the Sixers, obviously they're top-end guys. When we talk about experience, they don't have the experience. Their secondary players, as you mentioned, do. Boston, Horford, Smart, Jaylen Brown, Rozier, they were all part of a team that went to the Eastern Conference Finals. But Brad Stevens has also coached in 3 playoffs now, Brett Brown in his first. How much does that matter?
Yeah, I think that matters probably more than the players do. I think Stevens has, with that experience in his pocket now, he knows kind of how to prepare his team. And when you look at what they did, their kind of progression through the playoffs, first year in, they took their lumps, got swept. Second year, a little closer, but knocked out. Last year, advanced conference finals. This year, they're on the verge of getting back there again. And what it does is it allows him to make better use of that time off in between games, which is, once you get there as a coach, you know how hard you got to push your guys versus how much needs to be focused and game planning. And that's, I think, where Brad Stevens has done quite a good job so far through this playoff run.
Yeah, and you could see that, he has really exploited a couple of weaknesses and kept going. The one problem that the Sixers have had is people are saying, well, they need to make the adjustments. Do you think the Sixers personnel-wise, specifically in the offensive end, they do not have a lot of creators? What adjustments can they make on the offensive side of the ball with the personnel they have?
Yeah, well, that's what I always laugh is, it's people say, well, they need to make adjustments. Well, okay, what adjustments is a question I always counter back with, because no one really seems to come with that. It's just make adjustments. And you hit the nail on the head on offense. It's really Ben Simmons is responsible for creating a large bulk of the offense. Beyond that, they pretty much run what everybody else runs. It's a lot of screen actions for Redick and Covington, and then a lot of post-ups inside for Embiid. And that's something that Boston is content to do. You've seen they have played Embiid straight up. They've barely doubled him at all the entire series, and they're content to let that be the way the game kind of flows, because then they can stick with the other guys. And if they get beat on a series of 2-pointers and Embiid scores 40, then they get beat that way. They're not going to get beat going down with 3-pointers. As far as an adjustment, everybody keeps throwing out, play Markelle Fultz, put him in there. He can create offense. He can do this. You're talking about a 20-year-old kid who has barely played all season long, and now all of a sudden you want him to come to the rescue in the playoffs. I don't think that's the best thing for him and where his head is at in his career, because if he doesn't do that, you risk doing more long-term damage than you do any kind of short-term good.
Keith, it's clear that Ben Simmons made some mistakes down the stretch in that Game 3. Of those 3 mistakes, though, the missed dunk, shooting the ball with 17.2 seconds left and the shot clock turned off, or the entry past Embiid that was then stolen away by Al Horford, which of those was the most grievous to you?
Yeah, it was the missed putback when he had that offensive rebound. The missed dunk happens. I mean, people want to complain. LeBron James and Michael Jordan have missed plenty of dunks in their career, multiple times wide open. That's going to happen. The turnovers, those kind of things can happen. But getting that offensive rebound and not knowing clock and score, that's tough. That's a tough break. You have to get that ball, pull it down, and pull it back out. There's been a lot of suggestions. He just didn't want to get fouled and go to the line. But even if that had happened, even if he had only hit 1 or 2, you're still in pretty good shape. And the fact that he shot that ball as quickly as he did from not a great angle, a little off balance, that is just a really rough mistake to have at a point in the game where you could not afford it.
Mike and I got there. We watched the game from the hockey press box. That's where our seats were. And what we observed from up top, you can really see how the screens take place. And it looked to us like the Sixers continued to have trouble off screens to figure out, wait a second, my guy, I just got screened. Who do I follow now? Do you see that as well, that the Sixers are just a step late adapting to who they're supposed to chase after a screen comes?
Yeah, definitely. And one thing I want to say there too is, plenty of my seats when I've been in there on a press pass or up high too, and I actually prefer it from there rather than close because you can see a lot more of the game and you can see things that you're mentioning, and that's exactly what it is. What Boston is doing, because they don't have a ton of offensive creators right now either. It's really Tatum and Rozier can create offense. Everybody else needs a little bit of help, or they're better as a distributor. So what Brad Stevens has done, he's running these guys through a series of screens, a series of double screens and role plays, and it's making Philadelphia have to really think and adjust on the fly, and they're just not pulling it off right now. And that's been a huge reason why Boston continues to get these open looks at the rim, and because they're outside of when Baines is in the game, they're playing Horford and really making sure they get Embiid away from the paint as best as they can, which is also opening up those layups and dunks right at the basket.
Keith Smith, CelticsBlog.com, Real GM here on the Sports Bash. Are you surprised that Boston has been able to go one-on-one with Embiid? I mean, they're just saying, fine, Baines, guard him one-on-one. Horford, guard him one-on-one. He was 10 for 26, and they don't need to double him or anything. To me, that's been a big storyline in this series, is that the Sixers are dumping it down to Joel, and Boston's not doubling them. They're just going one-on-one with them.
Yeah, it's a little surprise to me, but that's how they played them in the regular season as well. They attempted to go straight up. Brad Stevens doesn't like to double unless he really, really has to. He prefers to play guys straight up and make them, if they're going to beat them that way, they'll beat them that way. And one thing is what you see is it's just as Embiid seems to adjust to the strength of Baines, that's when then they switch, and now it's Horford who has the much better quickness in a lot of ways, the more smarts and length to put on Joel Embiid. So that's tough. I think what is also being forgotten is Joel Embiid, for all purposes, he's really halfway through year 2 as far as playing time goes on the floor. So what you're seeing now is he's taking some shots and forcing some things where I think in a year or 2, he won't do that. He'll make sure he gets the ball out or he reposts as opposed to forcing up some of the looks he's had, which is playing right into Boston's hand.
What do you think, Keith, that Boston's doing to take Saric and Covington out of the games? Because both of those guys, look, everybody likes to point the finger at Ben, including me, for the mistakes that he had down the stretch. But Robert Covington, especially on the defensive end, and Dario Saric, I mean, they're like, we got to put them in the witness protection program. Where are these guys?
Yeah, they're locking them up and making sure that they don't get clean touches on the perimeter. And then when they do get a touch, Boston's getting right up on them. And neither one of those guys is great at putting the ball on the deck and really creating any offense. And it doesn't matter whether it's Tatum or Brown or Smart or even when it's Marcus Morris in there. Those guys are pressing up on them and really making them uncomfortable. And we've seen, again, both guys have some turnovers. One thing to watch that Philly's gotten a lot of mileage out of in the couple of close games in the series is Dario Saric getting the offensive boards. It's one of those things where I think he surprises people because he's not a great leaper, he's not overly fast, but he really knows how to position and use his body. But unfortunately, if that's the best thing you're giving to an offense, that probably means things aren't going too well for you across the board.
Keith, you've seen a lot of the Celtics. How different of a team are they with Rozier as opposed to Kyrie? I mean, I can't imagine that Kyrie was going to give him much more offense in this, but he's got to be giving him Rozier better defense.
Yeah, Rozier, he does get after it defensively. That definitely has changed things. The one thing that you miss with Kyrie offensively is Rozier is going to get a lot more. He can create jump shots for himself, and you see that with a lot of step backs and fall away jump shots he takes and those things. Where Kyrie is a lot better at getting the ball to the rim and getting to the basket area. So that has been a big part that's missing for Boston. It's especially late in games. You see sometimes their offense can kind of go to pot because it's a lot of jump shots and a lot of no one's getting anything going to the hoop, and that's where they really miss Kyrie. But Terry Rozier has played far better this entire playoff run than I think anybody ever expected he could.
Yeah, I mean, you look at how much different this team would be with Kyrie. I mean, at this stage, it's hard to say they'd be significantly different because of the way Rozier's playing. I mean, that has to be the biggest surprise in this series is what Rozier has given them offensively.
Yeah, it absolutely has been, all the way going back to the first round in the Bucks series as well. He was excellent in those games, more so at home than on the road, but he was a big reason why they won that first round series. And it's been a pleasant surprise, and definitely I think now what Celtics fans are starting to look forward to is they're starting to feel they went into the playoffs almost with a lot of, hey, we're playing with house money. We're just here. We're not supposed to win anything because we don't have Kyrie. We don't have Gordon Hayward. Now people are starting to look at it and say, hey, wait a minute, we're adding these guys kind of in a way for free because they're already signed and part of the team, so you don't have to give up anything to go get them, and they can return almost the bulk of the roster. And I think that's where people are starting to really wonder, and that's where you're starting to hear some of the crazy thoughts around, like, well, maybe you should trade Kyrie, that's a horrible idea. Let's have Terry Rozier have more than a couple weeks worth of good games before we start talking about trading one of the best point guards in the NBA. But that's kind of the embarrassment of riches that Celtics fans are enjoying right now.
How much have you seen Tatum kind of blossom in these playoffs?
Yeah, it's unbelievable. I tweeted the other night, he made a floater over Joel Embiid, and he hasn't made very many floaters this year. So the fact that in game 92, he's pulling out floaters in the lane over legit 7-footers, that's incredible to me that you're seeing that. Normally by this point in the year, guys they're not breaking out new moves unless it's kind of or offense by accident. And Jason Tatum's not doing that. He's so poised and patient, has been from day one. Nothing really seems to faze him. He just kind of does his thing out there. And he's starting to become one of those guys where, because he does it in a lot of ways, a lot of different ways, all of a sudden you look up and he's got 20 points and you're like, this guy is just, he's kind of the silent assassin out there. Is just killing you on the move and doing all sorts of different things. It's just, I can't remember a rookie playing like this with this poise and still breaking out moves this late into the season that we haven't seen before.
And Keith, you have to know how that's playing in Philly. Did Danny Ainge dupe the Sixers?
Yeah, I don't know. I don't want to quite go that far because I don't want to write off Markelle Fultz just yet. I do believe Danny Ainge. I was on the press conference when the trade was made, and Ainge said, after the pick was made, rather, that they would have picked Jason Tatum at number 1 overall. He was the guy they wanted. He was the guy they believe fit with their roster construction, the way things were going. So I think it's a case of Boston, used it as far as, hey, we can still get the guy we want and pick up an extra asset down the road. But I don't want to go as far as saying, anybody lost or won this trade fully, because we can't decide on what Markelle Fultz is yet at this point in his young career. Hopefully he bounces back and it looks a lot more even than it does right now.
But how about for Tatum? I mean, he's averaging 22.6 points per game in 7 games against the Sixers in both the regular and postseason. You think he's playing with a chip on his shoulder every time he sees Philly on the other side of the court?
Yeah, I think he's got a chip on his shoulder because of that. I think he's got a chip on his shoulder because it's Ben Simmons and Donovan Mitchell, and he's been kind of the consensus third rookie. But I don't think for him it's content enough to be the third rookie. And there's a lot of buzz building that, hey, if I'm the third rookie my rookie year, that's fine, but I want to be the best guy, when all is said and done. And I think that's where his mindset is. And I think for Jason Tatum, another reason why the Celtics wanted him is it's not about anything individual. He just wants to keep winning games and keep this thing moving forward, and he's been a huge part of that for the Celtics.
Keith Smith, CelticBlog.com, Real GM here on the Boardwalk Honda Hotline. Game number 4, top of the hour, Sixers-Celtics at the Wells Fargo Center. Listen to it right here on 97.3. Keith, appreciate it, man.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me.